America's expiration date. That's frightening to me, Cal. It sounds like we're on our way out.
Well, as you discussed with Ollie North, there is a pattern to history, Mike, and it's not just a cliche that the only thing we learn from history is that we don't learn from it. I've looked at 8 empires here. The book is based on an essay by the late British diplomat Sir John Glubb, who studied 3,000 years of human history and found that there's a pattern to the decline of nations. Number one, massive national debt. We're $23 trillion in debt and counting. Military overreach. The president, to his credit, is trying to pull back on some of that and asking other nations to pony up some money for their own defense. A loss of a sense of God, a collective moral sense. Pew Research, as you know, surveyed millennials, found 20% of them said they have no religious preference at all. So I look at all of these, Persia and Spanish Empire, Russia before the Bolshevik Revolution, and Rome, of course, and you find on the same pattern. And then the last chapter on the United States suggests that we are on the same road, and there's really nothing, no guarantee that we're going to preserve and persevere as a nation if we follow the same patterns of these other empires.
I mean, it sounds pretty dire. Is there a pathway out of this? Yeah. I mean, can we be the exception?
Yeah, we can. Well, it's not going to be a Broadway musical. It's a serious book. But it is, you know, the Old Testament prophets were kind of dark about their prophecies for nations and individuals who forget God. Now, Lincoln said that the major cause of the Civil War is that we forgot God. Solzhenitsyn said the only reason that Soviet communism prevailed for 7 decades is that we forgot God. Moses warned against it. Jesus warned against it. The scriptures are full of warnings of what happens to individuals and nations who forget God. Now, my view is that we need to care for the next generation and the one to follow. And the way we do that, in my opinion, is to stop putting them in these re-education camps. The public schools, not all of them, but many of them, that teach we evolved from slime and our nearest relative is down at the zoo. That's why we like bananas on our cereal. We need to stop sending them to these universities where professors are trained to undermine their faith, undermine the values of their parents, and they're actually getting paid to do this. You know, Barbara Bush said something very profound. I quote her in the book. I've quoted her many times with full credit. Our success as a nation, your success as a family, depends less on what happens in the White House and more on what happens in your house.
That's a very, very good reminder. Because I think sometimes we think, oh, if we just elect this guy to be president or this guy becomes the senator or congressman or governor, everything's going to be okay. And it's not so much that we can elect our way into a revival.
Yeah, well, leadership is important, but so is followership and who we follow. If we're following the golden calf of the Dow Jones Industrials, which aren't doing too well recently, we're going to be disappointed. We are focused on pleasure, on things. You know, you mentioned revival. I talk about often the great 1857 revival, which preceded the Civil War, where 2 men got together on their lunch hour in New York City once a week to pray for revival in America. And then some other men began to join them, and they were in the Dutch Consistory building, the building that survived 9/11 and the attack. And pretty soon the crowd was so big they couldn't fit in the room anymore, so they moved to the churches at night and invited their spouses. And it wasn't long before the revival began. And at the height of it, 10,000 people a week were being converted to Christ in New York City alone. And when the revival got down to West Virginia in the middle of winter, they cut holes in the ice to baptize people, prompting one commentator to say, when Baptists do that, you know they're on fire.
That would be a little extreme. I think I would just make my conversion sometime in July.
Yeah, but here's the thing, Mike. You know, when you seek to honor God and you're not looking to pursue your own success and pleasure, He does marvelous things. That revival, when it jumped the Atlantic, crime virtually disappeared in London. Public drunkenness almost disappeared. People ask, well, what did the police do? We said, well, there's hardly any crime anymore, so they formed quartets to sing at the revival meetings. Seriously, when
that really happened.
Yeah, it did. J. Edwin Orr writes about this in his wonderful book on the history of revivals in America. And here's the best line of the whole thing, I think. When the revival hit Wales, there was a work slowdown in the coal mines. And somebody said, well, how could there be a work slowdown in the middle of a revival? And the answer was, so many miners were converted, they stopped using bad languages, and the horses couldn't understand what was being said to them. But see, that's the power. That's where the real power comes from. You know that wonderful line from Chariots of Fire where Eric Liddell Ask, where does the power come from? It comes from within, not within yourself, but by the presence of God. And the founders understood this, as you know. And this is why our Declaration of Independence is the philosophical foundation of the Constitution. We're created, we didn't evolve, equal, endowed, not by government, but by our Creator with certain unalienable rights. Right to life, liberty, pursuit of happiness. And then in the next clause, Mr. Jefferson outlines the purpose of government. And to secure these rights, he wrote, governments are instituted among men. Well, why is that necessary? Because as James Madison said, if men were angels, we wouldn't need government. People are sinners, and we have to be constrained from within by the presence and power of God, or restrained by the state acting under God, a very important distinction, because without that, you have a dictatorship. And so that was the whole purpose and premise of government. But as we move away from that, we put ourselves in great jeopardy along with these other empires I write about.
If there is anyone watching what you've just said and they don't want to get this book, they've turned to the wrong channel. I mean, they must be here by accident because, I mean, it's an intriguing reminder that what has held our country together has been a common thread of faith,
yes, and
that without it, we begin to unravel.
Well, so many wrote about this and spoke about it. George Washington, Madison, all of these people. Unless you have a transcendent purpose, not only for your life, beyond getting up in the morning, going to work, making money, paying bills, buying stuff, and renting a storage unit for the overflow, if you don't have a transcendent purpose, what's the point? As Peggy Lee sang years ago, I'm dating myself, I know, which in high school was the only option I had. Is that all there is to life? If that's all there is, let's break out the booze and have a ball. We got to have a transcendent purpose, and I feel we're losing that as a nation.
When you talk about America's expiration date, and I ask you, do you think we're just destined to be there? You say no, but it doesn't sound like that we're on the right path. How do we change it? How does our audience become part of changing this?
Well, you know what people say when they're confronted by seemingly impossible circumstances. All I can do is pray. Now, why do you leave prayer as a last resort instead of a first resource? You know? Paul writes in Romans 8 that God has built futility into his creation in hope that the creation will turn to him. Now, you and I are of a certain age, and we've seen everything. Republicans, Democrats, liberals, conservatives. If politics could fix things, if spending more money could fix things, things would be fixed by now. Because we've tried everything. And I think, God sits in the heavens and laughs, the psalmist writes, at our puny efforts to reform and redeem ourselves. And so I think, like the revivals, 2 or 3 people getting together to pray, not just so the stock market will go up, because God responds when you honor him. I have engraved on the back of my watch my favorite verse, 1 Samuel 2:30, he who honors me, I will honor. I believe that with all my heart.